In a galaxy scarred by war, where hope flickers like the last flame in the dark, one name rises from the forgotten sands. Rey. Who was she before she held a lightsaber? How did a lonely scavenger become the last hope of the Jedi? Tonight we dive deep into the untold journey of Rey Skywalker, a story of destiny, courage, and the fight between light and darkness. Stay with us, because every step of her path hides a secret that will change everything you thought you knew about Star Wars. Part 1. A lonely child in the sands of Jakku. The desert of Jakku was endless. A sea of golden sands stretching far beyond the horizon, where the sun scorched everything beneath its relentless gaze. In that desolation, among the wreckage of forgotten starships and the bones of past wars, lived a girl who had no one to call family. Her name was Rey. Every morning, before the heat became unbearable, she would set out with her staff in hand, her eyes scanning the skeletal remains of star destroyers that loomed like ghosts in the distance. Her life was survival, scavenging old wrecks for scraps of metal and machinery, trading them for a meager portion of food. No one cared who she was, where she came from, or what dreams she might have had. The marketplace was crowded, but to Rey it was a place of silence. She spoke little, kept her head down, and avoided the gaze of strangers. In her heart there was a hollow space, the memory of small hands clinging to a departing ship, the desperate scream for parents who never turned back. That memory replayed in her mind like a scar that never healed. Yet, despite the emptiness, there was something unbroken within her. At night, sitting beside her tiny dwelling made of scrap metal, she would watch the twin suns sink into the horizon. The sky would ignite in a canvas of orange and violet, and in those moments, she imagined a different life, one where she wasn't just a scavenger, but someone destined for something greater. Sometimes she would see ships pass overhead, their engines leaving trails of light in the darkening sky. She would close her eyes and whisper to herself, "Someday." It wasn't hope exactly, but a quiet defiance, the belief that this desert wasn't the end of her story. Still, days bled into weeks, weeks into years. The girl in the sand learned to hide her longing behind a mask of indifference. But somewhere, deep within, the force stirred, faint, unclaimed, waiting for the moment when her life would change forever. Part 2. The awakening of the force within the days on Jakku had a way of blending together. The same sand, the same scavenging, the same hollow hunger that gnawed at the belly. But on that day, something shifted. The air felt different, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Rey didn't understand it yet, but the first threads of destiny had begun to weave themselves into her life. It started with a stranger, not the kind who passed through the marketplace quickly and vanished into the horizon, but someone who carried danger and purpose in equal measure. His name was Finn, though Rey didn't know it at the time. All she knew was that trouble had found him, and that trouble had a way of spilling over to anyone who stood too close. The two crossed paths near the wreck of an old transport. Rey had just finished pulling a panel loose, her hands raw from the effort, when she heard the whine of blaster fire in the distance. In Jakku, blaster fire wasn't uncommon, but this felt closer, more urgent. And then she saw him, running, sand kicking up behind him, eyes darting, clutching a small spherical droid that beeped frantically. BB-28? She could have ignored it. Survival meant staying out of trouble, avoiding strangers and their problems. But something inside her, something that had been quiet for years, stirred. She felt a pull, an unexplainable certainty that her life was about to change. Stormtroopers appeared on the ridge, white armor gleaming harshly under the sun. Rey didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, staff in hand, and with movements born of instinct more than training, she fought them off alongside Finn. She didn't stop to think how she'd done it so quickly or why she seemed to move before danger reached her. It was as if her body knew the fight before it happened. The battle ended as quickly as it began, but the echoes of it remained in her chest. She felt her pulse racing, not just from fear, but from something else, a strange energy humming beneath her skin. When she touched BB-8, a flash of something rippled through her, images, feelings, like whispers she couldn't quite hear. That night, as they hid in the remains of an old starship, Rey stared out through a jagged opening at the stars above. Her heart was restless. She remembered the way her hands had moved, the way her senses had sharpened in the fight. She thought about the droid, about the strange man who seemed to be running from an entire army, and about the shipwrecks that loomed like silent watchers in the dark. Somewhere, far away, the galaxy was in turmoil. She didn't know it yet, but the same force that had shaped the destinies of Jedi for generations was awakening in her, and it would not let her return to her old life. The scavenger of Jakku was about to become something else entirely. Part 3, crossing paths with Han Solo and the Millennium Falcon. The desert was no longer safe. After the encounter with the stormtroopers, Jakku had turned from a place of harsh survival to a battlefield where every shadow could hold an enemy. The First Order was hunting them, Finn, BB-8, and now Rey, and it would only be a matter of time before they were cornered. It happened suddenly, a sharp whistle of engines overhead. Not the slow, distant hum of freighters that crossed Jakku's skies. This was closer, a roar that shook the sand. Rey's eyes shot upward to see black silhouettes slicing across the blinding sun, TIE fighters, diving fast, the howl of their ion engines echoing through the empty wastes. They had seconds to react. "Run!" Finn shouted, clutching BB-8 as blaster bolts rained down, throwing sand into the air in hot bursts. Rey's mind raced. The marketplace was behind them, a death trap now. The open desert meant certain capture. She scanned the horizon and saw it, the rusting shell of an old freighter half buried in the sand. She didn't think. She sprinted toward it. "That ship's garbage!" Finn yelled, desperate for another option. Rey didn't slow. "The garbage will do." The closer they got, the more the outline of the freighter became familiar. A round saucer shape, forward mandibles, a battered hull scarred by decades of battle. It was more than just a junked freighter. It was the Millennium Falcon. Inside, the ship smelled of old metal, oil, and dust, a machine that had been asleep too long. Rey's hands moved across the controls like she had done this before, flipping switches and igniting systems she had never been taught. The cockpit hummed to life, ancient engines groaning as if waking from a long slumber. TIE fighters swooped low, their laser fire pounding the sand around the Falcon. Rey gripped the controls, pulling hard as the ship lurched off the ground. It wasn't graceful. The Falcon rose like a stubborn beast, but it flew. She weaved through the wreckage fields, the familiar dunes replaced by towering metal skeletons of fallen star destroyers. Each maneuver was instinctive, her mind anticipating the enemy's moves before they made them. Blaster fire lit up the cockpit with flashes of green. Rey dived the Falcon into the hull of a crashed warship, flying through corridors barely wide enough for the ship's body. Sparks from scraping metal rained down like falling stars. Finn clung to his seat, shouting, "How are you doing this?" "I don't know." She shot back, adrenaline flooding every nerve. The final TIE fighter exploded behind them in a bloom of fire and debris. The Falcon soared out of the wreckage, climbing higher until Jakku's dunes became a swirling blur beneath them. For the first time in years, Rey was leaving the planet. Her heart pounded as she stared at the stars ahead, an infinite ocean waiting for her. But before she could fully breathe, a deeper voice crackled from behind them. "Chewie, we're home!" Turning, Rey's eyes locked onto a man who carried the weight of decades in his gaze. Weathered face, gray hair, but an unmistakable presence, Han Solo, the smuggler who had become a legend. And at his side, towering and growling warmly, Chewbacca. The Falcon was no longer just a ship. It was the beginning of Rey's true journey, a door into a galaxy she had only ever dreamed about under the twin suns of Jakku. Part 4, First Confrontation with Kylo Ren. The Falcon's escape from Jakku had been a whirlwind, but freedom was short-lived. Rey barely had time to adjust to the dizzying reality of space travel before the galaxy's darkness caught up to her. It came like a shadow stretching across the stars, the First Order. Their ships fell upon them with precision, not just hunting the droid BB-8, but seeking something else. Rey didn't know it then, but her very presence was already drawing the attention of their most feared enforcer, Kylo Ren. When she first saw him, it was like staring into a void. The air itself seemed to grow heavier, colder. He stepped from the smoke of battle, the black folds of his robe twisting with the wind, his mask reflecting the fire of burning wreckage. Each slow step toward her felt deliberate, a predator closing in on prey. Her instincts screamed to run, but she froze, not from fear, but from a strange sensation that crawled under her skin. The closer he came, the more she felt exposed, as if he could see her thoughts before she could think them. Blaster fire erupted around them, Han and Finn fighting to hold off the stormtroopers. But Kylo Ren moved as if none of it mattered. With a single motion of his gloved hand, he froze a bolt of blaster fire in midair, the energy shimmering, hissing, trapped in place like time itself had stopped. Rey's breath caught in her throat. Then his attention locked fully on her. He didn't attack. Instead, he stepped closer until the air between them seemed to hum. "You?" His voice was deep, metallic, distorted. "I've been waiting for this." Before she could move, before she could even raise her staff, an invisible force wrapped around her. It was cold, crushing, and absolute, her limbs locked in place. The world narrowed to the sound of her own heartbeat. And then, his voice wasn't just in her ears, it was inside her head, probing, searching. She saw flashes, memories she had never shown anyone. The lonely nights on Jakku, the feeling of waiting for her parents who would never come back, the small dream she carried that she might belong somewhere. But something inside her pushed back, a flicker of resistance. His presence was suffocating, yet her mind reached out, and for the briefest second she saw something in him. A boy beneath the mask, a wound that had never healed. It was gone as quickly as it came. Kylo Ren released her just enough to let her breathe, but the damage was done. She felt violated, her mind rattled, but also stronger. She didn't know why, but the same strange energy she had felt during the fight on Jakku was swelling inside her. No longer a whisper, but a pulse, a heartbeat she couldn't ignore. With a single gesture, Kylo Ren signaled his troopers. "Bring her to me," he commanded. The next thing Rey knew, the world was swallowed by darkness as she was taken aboard his ship, a prisoner, but also something far more dangerous to him than he realized, because the Force was no longer sleeping within her. It was awake. Part 5, The Search for Luke Skywalker. The name Luke Skywalker was more than just history. To some, it was a legend of hope. To others, it was a ghost of a threat that had vanished too soon. But for Rey, it became a burning question, a missing piece she didn't yet understand she was meant to find. Her capture by Kylo Ren had shaken her, but it had also unlocked something she could no longer deny. In the cold metal corridors of Starkiller Base, alone and surrounded by enemies, Rey had felt the Force rise in her like a tide. She had escaped, not by chance but by instinct, instincts that had begun to feel like destiny. When she returned to the Resistance base, the mood was tense. The war with the First Order had reached a dangerous tipping point. Plans were being made for desperate strikes, but in hushed corners, leaders spoke of another mission, one not marked on any tactical map. Leia Organa stood before her, the weight of decades in her eyes. She spoke softly, almost as if speaking to herself. "We've been searching for him for years, my brother. The last Jedi." Rey listened, her pulse quickening. The map they carried in BB-8 wasn't just a fragment of coordinates. It was the final piece to a puzzle that could change the galaxy's fate. Luke Skywalker was hiding, not out of fear, but out of choice. And the reasons for that choice were locked away on a distant, uncharted island. The journey began aboard the Millennium Falcon. Han Solo was gone now, lost to the darkness of his own sun, and the ship felt emptier than it ever had. Chewbacca sat in silence, his hands steady on the controls, while BB-8 rolled quietly between the crew's feet. Finn was still recovering from his injuries, and Rey... She spent most of the flight staring at the stars, wondering if she was truly ready for what awaited her. Through the viewport, the galaxy passed like an endless ocean. Planets swirled below, asteroids drifted in slow silence, and beyond it all, the black void seemed infinite. Rey thought of Jakku's dunes, how she once imagined freedom among the stars, and now here she was, not just a traveler, but a seeker. When the Falcon emerged from hyperspace, the view was breathtaking. A vast ocean planet stretched below, endless blue broken only by a scattering of green islands. Wind currents rippled across the water like strokes of a giant brush. The coordinates pointed to the most remote of them all, a towering cliff crowned with ancient stone structures. The landing was rough. The Falcon rested on a patch of grass between jagged rocks, the sound of waves crashing far below. Rey stepped out into the open air, the salt wind whipping her hair into her face. She clutched the lightsaber, Luke's lightsaber, in her hand, its weight heavier than any weapon she'd ever held. The climb to the top was grueling. Narrow stone steps wound upward, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries echoing in the open sky. Her legs ached, but each step pulled her closer to the truth. At last, she reached the summit. There, standing with his back to her, gazing out at the endless horizon, was the man she had crossed the galaxy to find. His robe was tattered, his stance unmoving, as if carved from the very rock beneath them. Rey's breath caught. Slowly, Luke Skywalker turned, his face weathered, his eyes carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. Not all of them fought with a lightsaber. She stepped forward, holding out the weapon that had once been his. In that moment, no words passed between them. But the air was thick with unspoken meaning, the past colliding with the future. The student standing before the master she had never met. The search was over, but the real journey was only beginning. Part 6, The Island of Ahch-To, Lessons of a Reluctant Master. The wind on Ahch-To was never still. It swept in from the ocean in long, sighing breaths, carrying the scent of salt and the cries of seabirds. The stone beneath Rey's boots was cold, slick with a mist that never seemed to leave the island. She had imagined this place differently, not as a lonely ruin, but as a sanctuary, a hidden temple of wisdom. But Luke Skywalker's eyes told her otherwise. When she had placed the lightsaber in his hand, she had expected something. Recognition, acceptance, the spark of a new alliance. Instead, Luke had turned the weapon over in silence, his weathered fingers tracing the hilt as if it were an artifact from another lifetime. Then, without a word, he walked past her and disappeared into the narrow stone paths that cut through the island. For the next day, Rey followed him like a shadow. She watched him fish from the cliffs with a pole longer than she was tall. She saw him climb to a high ledge to milk the creatures that lived there, the green liquid filling old containers. She saw him walk among the ancient huts, pausing to touch the moss-covered stones as if remembering a story only he knew. When she tried to speak, his answers were brief, and they were never about the Force. Finally, frustration broke through her patience. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson, she found him standing alone on a cliff. The wind whipped his robe around him like a shroud. "You're Luke Skywalker," she said, her voice shaking with more than just the cold. "You fought in the war. You defeated the Emperor. You saved the galaxy. Why won't you help us?" His gaze remained fixed on the horizon. Because the Jedi need to end, the words struck her like a blow. She stepped closer, her hands tightening around the hilt of the lightsaber. The First Order is growing stronger every day. Kylo Ren. At the name, Luke's expression darkened. Ben Solo is gone. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the wind. I tried to train him, I failed. And my failure destroyed everything. Rey saw the weight in his shoulders, the guilt etched into his face. But she also felt the stubbornness, the wall he had built to keep himself from believing again. That night she couldn't sleep. She walked the island alone, the crash of the waves below like a constant heartbeat. In the quiet, she felt the Force calling, not as a voice, but as a pull, a connection between her and the world around her. She closed her eyes and breathed. The air filled her lungs differently here, as if she was inhaling something ancient. The next morning, Luke found her at the cliff's edge, eyes closed, hands resting on her knees. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally, he sat beside her. "If I teach you," he said, "it won't be what you expect. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even hope. But it was the first crack in the wall he had built around himself." The lessons began slowly. They were not like the stories Rey had imagined. There were no duels, no dramatic speeches, no easy answers. Instead, Luke led her to the steps of the first Jedi temple, its stones worn by 1,000 years of wind. He spoke of the balance between light and darkness, of the dangers of arrogance, of how the Force was not a weapon, but a living energy that connected all things. Yet, as Rey's understanding grew, so did something else. She began to feel the darkness inside herself, not as an enemy, but as a shadow that followed her. And somewhere in that shadow, she could feel Kylo Ren. Part 7, Uncovering the Truth of the Force. The days on Jakku no longer felt like days at all, more like fragments of a dream. Time slowed on the island, measured not by clocks but by the rhythm of the ocean tides and the long shadows cast by the setting sun. Retrained in silence, absorbing every word Luke gave her, but it wasn't enough. There was something missing. The Force was speaking to her. Not in the way she had expected, no clear instructions, no comforting guidance, but in fragments like shards of broken glass reflecting light from different angles. At night, when the wind howled through the stone huts, she would wake with her heart racing, her hands trembling, and visions still burning behind her eyes. She saw herself standing in a rainstorm, a crimson lightsaber in her hand. She saw Kylo Ren reaching toward her, his mask gone, his eyes searching hers not with hatred, but something else, something dangerous. She saw Luke younger, his face lit by the pale glow of fire and the shadows of destroyed buildings behind him. One morning, unable to keep it inside any longer, she confronted Luke outside the old Jedi temple. "I saw it," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "You and Ben Solo. Tell me what happened." Luke's expression hardened, but his eyes flickered with something, regret, fear, maybe both. He turned away, his gaze fixed on the sea below. "The truth depends on who's telling it." He told her in pieces, as if each word was a weight he had to force himself to lift. Ben had been powerful, gifted with the Force, but restless. Darkness whispered to him from the shadows of the galaxy, the voice of Supreme Leader Snoke. Luke had sensed it, and one night, in a moment of terrible weakness, he ignited his lightsaber over his sleeping nephew, not to strike, but to hesitate. But hesitation was enough. Ben had woken to see his master standing over him with a weapon, and in that instant, trust shattered. The temple burned that night. Luke's students scattered or died. Ben Solo was gone. In his place, Kylo Ren was born. Rey felt the story settle in her chest like a stone. But as she turned away, the Force stirred again, and this time it was stronger. She could feel Kylo Ren's presence as clearly as if he stood beside her. That night, as rain lashed against the cliffs, Rey found herself standing in the old meditation circle Luke had shown her. She closed her eyes, breathing in the storm, and then she saw him. Not in the flesh, but as if the distance between them had vanished. Kylo Ren stood before her, the darkness swirling around him, but his mask was gone. His eyes, deep, searching, locked onto hers. "You felt it too," he said quietly. She didn't answer. "This bond between us, it's not an accident." Rey's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "You're a murderer. And yet you can't stop seeing me," he replied. "The darkness doesn't frighten you as much as you think it does." The vision snapped away, leaving her alone in the cold rain. But his voice lingered in her mind. The truth of the Force was no longer simple. It wasn't just light against dark. It was connection, dangerous, undeniable, and growing stronger with every heartbeat. Part 8: The War for the Resistance. A flicker of hope, the sound of war reached Jakku before any ship did. It came in fragments through Resistance transmissions, desperate voices over crackling comms. Coordinates barked between bursts of static, the sharp, clipped tone of leaders trying to mask their fear. Rey didn't need to hear every word to understand. The galaxy was burning again. The First Order had struck hard. Fleets were scattered, supply lines cut. Resistance bases that had survived the last war were now nothing but glowing debris adrift in space. Leia Organa's voice, calm but urgent, threaded through the chaos. "Every moment counts. Hold on, help is coming." Rey stood at the edge of the cliff, the ocean below raging like the war above. Her hands clenched the lightsaber, Luke's lightsaber, the hilt warm from her grip. She had trained, she had learned, but still Luke resisted. He refused to leave with her, refused to pick up his weapon again. "The galaxy needs you," she told him one morning, her voice sharp. "They need someone else," he replied without looking at her. "The Jedi are not the answer anymore." His refusal was a blade twisting in her chest, but she could feel it, the pull of the Force guiding her away from this island, toward the heart of the fight. It wasn't just about her anymore. She could sense Finn, far away but alive, caught in the machinery of war. She could feel Leia's presence, steady, a beacon in the dark, and through it all there was Kylo Ren, a shadow she could not shake. The call came suddenly. A resistance ship broke through the clouds above Jakku, its metal hull streaked with burn marks from battle. Poe Dameron stepped out, his usual confident grin subdued. His jacket smelled faintly of smoke and fuel. "We don't have time," he said quickly. "We're down to one cruiser. The First Order is chasing us across the galaxy. If we don't find a way to hit them hard, it's over." Luke stood in the background, silent, his eyes on Rey. She didn't wait for him to speak. "I'm coming," she told Poe. The Falcon's engines roared to life once more, the salt wind whipping through the grass as the ship lifted from the island. Chewbacca gave a low growl, BB-8 beeped excitedly, and Poe's hand tightened on the controls. Jakku grew smaller in the viewport until it was only a speck in the endless blue below. When they jumped to hyperspace, Rey felt the shift in her bones, the sharp pull of destiny. The stars stretched into streaks of light, the familiar hum filling the cockpit. But inside her, the Force was no longer calm. It churned, turbulent, as if bracing her for something. The Resistance was holding the line on a remote mineral world called Crate, a barren expanse of white salt crust that bled red when disturbed. It was there the last survivors had gathered, hoping for reinforcements that might never come. When the Falcon dropped from hyperspace, Rey saw the battle unfolding below. Massive walkers advancing, Resistance fighters falling back toward the old rebel base. The ground was already scarred with long crimson streaks. Rey's heart surged. This was no longer someone else's fight. This was hers. As the Falcon dove toward the battlefield, she reached out with the Force, feeling every heartbeat, every spark of life in the fight below. Somewhere in that storm of chaos, she felt Leia, and she felt him. Kylo Ren, the war for the Resistance was about to decide more than just survival. It would decide the shape of the galaxy itself, and where Rey's path would lead. Part 9, The Revelation of Palpatine, Bloodlines and Destiny. The war on Crate had ended in survival, but not victory. The Resistance had escaped, battered yet breathing, while the First Order tightened its grip on system after system. Rey, now aboard the Falcon, felt the unease gnawing at her in quiet moments. She had seen Kylo Ren's face, seen the choice he made when he reached for the throne of the First Order instead of her outstretched hand. She told herself she was ready to face him again, but deep inside something was shifting, something she didn't yet understand. It began with whispers in the Force, not words but impressions, cold, dark, ancient. Dreams that weren't dreams at all, a throne wreathed in shadow, lightning splitting the black sky, the faint echo of a laugh that made her skin crawl. She didn't tell Finn, she didn't tell Leia, but she could feel that these visions weren't random. They were pulling her toward something, or someone. When the Resistance received intelligence about a hidden Sith world called Exegol, the air in the war room turned heavy. Maps flickered with static, encrypted coordinates burned across holoscreens. Leia's gaze lingered on Rey longer than on anyone else. She didn't say it aloud, but Rey could hear it in her voice. This was meant for her. The journey to Exegol was like traveling through the bones of the galaxy. Lightning storms danced across dead space, asteroids drifted like silent sentinels, and the Falcon shuddered as it pushed into the unknown. Rey's fingers tightened around the lightsaber. She could feel the darkness ahead of her now, thick and oppressive, wrapping around her like a living thing. The Sith Citadel rose from the storms like something pulled from the nightmares of 1,000 generations. Its black stone spires clawed at the sky, each one carved with symbols older than the Republic itself. Inside, the air smelled of dust and death. Torches guttered with pale blue fire, casting trembling shadows across the walls. And there he was, Emperor Palpatine. His body, broken and unnatural, suspended by ancient Sith machinery. His voice was no whisper now. It was a force that filled the chamber, seeping into her bones. "My granddaughter?" The words froze her blood. She stared at him, her mind refusing to accept what she had just heard. "That's not true," she said, her voice shaking. But Palpatine only smiled, a slow, venomous curl of his lips. He spoke of her parents, not nobodies as she had believed, but people who had chosen to hide her, to keep her from the fate he had planned. They had died for that choice. And now here she was, standing before the very thing they had tried to protect her from. The force inside her rippled, torn between rage and horror. Images flashed in her mind, her parents' faces, the wreckage on Jakku, the lonely years scavenging to survive. All of it, now redefined by one truth. Her blood carried the legacy of the darkest man the galaxy had ever known. She stumbled back, her hand clutching the saber so tightly her knuckles whitened. She wanted to deny it, to tell herself it didn't matter, but the voice in her head, his voice, was insistent. "You were born to rule, born to take the throne that is yours by right." Her heart hammered as she turned away from him, forcing herself to breathe. She could feel the danger in every step she took away from that throne room, because if she stayed too long, she might start believing him. But one thing became clear as she left the Citadel. This war was no longer just between the Resistance and the First Order. This was about her choices, her strength, her very soul. And if she failed, the galaxy would fall with her. Part 10, The Final Battle, Light Against Darkness. The galaxy held its breath. Fleets massed above countless worlds, yet all eyes, all hope, all fear converged on one place, Exegol. The Resistance had gambled everything, gathering every surviving ally, every ship that could still fly, for one desperate strike. The black storms above the Sith world churned with unnatural fury, lightning tearing jagged wounds in the sky. Rey stood alone on a landing platform, the wind lashing her cloak against her legs, her saber unlit in her hand. The path before her was simple: reach the Emperor and end him. The path within her was far more dangerous. Every step closer to Palpatine's throne felt like a step deeper into her own shadow. His voice still echoed in her mind, dripping with temptation. "You are the only one strong enough to rule. Join me, and the galaxy is yours." She pressed forward, her boots ringing on the ancient stone. The throne room was a cathedral of darkness, the air thick with the scent of ozone and decay. Palpatine waited, his throne a jagged black spire rising above a floor of shifting shadows. Around him, hooded figures lined the chamber, chanting in a language Rey couldn't understand, but felt in her bones. Then the doors behind her thundered open. Kylo Ren, no, Ben Solo, stepped inside. His face was bare, the mask gone, his expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Palpatine's laughter rolled through the chamber like a storm. "Together," he purred, "you could destroy me. Together, you could rule." Rey's grip tightened on her saber, the hum of its ignition breaking the suffocating silence. Ben drew his own weapon, a clean blue blade, the saber of a Jedi, not a Sith. For the first time, Rey saw him as he truly was. Not the monster who had hunted her, but the man who had been buried beneath the darkness. They moved as one. The guards rushed forward, crimson armor gleaming, pikes and blades slashing through the air. Rey's saber cut through the first in a flash of light. Ben parried another strike with fluid precision. Sparks lit the dark, the sound of clashing blades echoing like thunder. Every movement between them felt instinctive, a wordless rhythm forged from battles past. But Palpatine was not merely watching. He reached into the Force, his power surging like a tidal wave. Bolts of pure Sith lightning ripped through the air, striking both of them, hurling them to their knees. The pain was white-hot, blinding, a storm that tore at their very life force. Rey could hear him above the crackle of energy. "Strike me down, and my spirit will live within you. All the Sith will be reborn in your body. Do it and save them all." Her hands trembled. She could feel the pull, the promise of ending the war in one stroke, of wielding power beyond anything she'd imagined. But she also felt the trap, the chain that would bind her forever. And then she heard another voice, Leia's, soft but unshakable. "Don't be afraid of who you are." Rey met Ben's gaze. His eyes, filled with pain, held only one truth. They would do this together. Palpatine roared, unleashing his full fury. The lightning lashed upward, striking the Resistance fleet above, ships bursting into flame. Rey staggered to her feet, raising her saber, then another. Ben had thrown his weapon to her. She crossed the twin blades above her head, the light blinding, the power flowing not from rage but from resolve. The lightning met her blades in a searing explosion. The ground shook, the shadows screamed, and Palpatine's power began to fold back on itself, consuming him. His body withered, the throne shattered, and the darkness that had clung to the galaxy for decades unraveled into nothingness. When it was over, the room was silent, but for the crackle of dying fires. Rey collapsed, the sabers falling from her hands. Her breath came shallow, the weight of what she had done pressing down on her. She didn't see Ben until his hands cradled her head. His presence in the Force was warm now, steady, the darkness finally gone. And in that moment, that brief, impossible moment, she felt safe. He gave his life for hers, pouring his remaining strength into her, and when she opened her eyes again, he was gone. Outside, the Resistance fleet was victorious. Across the galaxy, celebrations erupted. But for Rey, standing on the broken stone of the Sith throne room, the victory was quieter. She had faced the darkness within and without, and chosen the light. The war was over. But her journey was not. From the scorching deserts of Jakku to the heart of the galaxy's greatest battles, Rey Skywalker's journey is not just the tale of a hero, it's the reminder that anyone, no matter where they come from, can rise to change the fate of the universe. If this journey moved you, if you discovered something new today, don't forget to hit the like button, share this story with other Star Wars fans, and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden truths of the galaxy far, far away. The Force will be with you, always.